Hello, my name is Kyle Steele and I'm running for Norman City Council Ward 6. And as I've been knocking on doors and talking to people lately, the issue of TIFs has come up quite a bit. So I thought I'd just kind of make a video to explain my stance a bit more clearly, just to be completely transparent about this, since that is one of the pillars of my campaign. The information you're about to see, this is kind of information that I've been researching. It's kind of my personal opinion, my opinion as a candidate. It's intended for use by my campaign, but anyone's welcome to kind of use this PowerPoint or this video and reference it, as long as you source it correctly. And then if you're wondering about other issues I'm kind of campaigning on, that's available on my website, which is KyleForNorman.com. You could also get it from my YouTube, which is also KyleForNorman, and see a video similar to this one, but for other campaign issues. Now, to be perfectly clear here, just so no one's wasting their time, this video is just going to be a high-level overview about what a TIF is, how TIFs have been used in Norman in the past, and what kind of reforms that I would be in favor of if elected to the city council. What's not going to be covered here is the full history, shall we say, of the entertainment district and arena. If you're wanting kind of like what's going on with that, I would refer you to the Oklahomans for Responsible Economic Development, or ORED. They're very active on Facebook. They're the group that's currently spearheading the appeal before the Supreme Court currently of the citizens petition, and they're just going to have way more knowledge about its history than I ever would. So I would check them out on Facebook if you want to learn more about that. So with all that being said, what is a TIF? A TIF is essentially a financing tool that can be used to develop or redevelop an area to help generate tax revenue for a city for up to 25 years. Essentially what happens is, let's say you have an area that you want to develop or revitalize because it's got some aging infrastructure. You could take out a loan to pay for that, and pay for a TIF district, essentially, pay for those improvements, and then tax revenue generated within that district goes towards paying back the loan. Once that loan is repaid, then the revenue would go towards the city, most likely the general fund as normal, and to be used for whatever projects the city deems appropriate. Ideally, the TIF is going to bring in more money than you're spending on it. It's just a way to essentially revitalize an area you may not have money for upfront to pay for, but it would allow you to get a loan and pay back that loan. For Norman, if you do this research on your own, there's going to be 3 TIFs that come up, and I just have them all listed there, as well as their costs and the years that they were enacted by the city council at the time. You'll also notice in that last column there, I did the adjusted cost for inflation for September 2024. The reason why I did September 2024 is so you could see what the cost was at the time that the Rock Creek Entertainment District has passed, and you can kind of see the differences between TIF projects that were approved in the past versus the one that was approved this last year. And just looking at that amount there, you kind of see why people were raising eyebrows or had some concerns on if this was financially sound for the city to be doing. Now, if we were kind of to reform the TIF process, there are essentially 2 ways you could go about it. You could do it via ordinances or charter amendments. Ordinances, they're quick and dirty. It's just something that the city council could pass with a 5-4 vote. It wouldn't be as expensive as the charter amendment route, and it would just be the simple short-term solution. The problem with ordinances is, just like you could pass an ordinance with the 5-4 vote, you could also remove an ordinance with the 5-4 vote, right? So in the future, city council could choose to remove any ordinances that the current city council passed, and you'd be right back to the current TIF process. Now with charter amendments, that's a bit more long-term and harder to undo. Essentially, you would send a question to the ballot, and then the voters would vote on it, and if approved, it would become part of the city's charter. The pro of this is that once this TIF process is in place via the charter amendment, changes or the removal of that would have to also be approved by the Norman voters, and that would prevent future city councils from reverting these changes. The cons is this would take longer and this would cost more money. Essentially, we as the city would have to go to the Cleveland County Election Board get a question, get it printed off on a ballot, decide a date, blah, 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 right? It take longer, cost more money, but it's the more safer long-term solution that I would personally recommend. Now, if we're changing how the TIF process works, so what in that TIF process are we going to change? How is that going to look? There's kind of two ways that could look, in my opinion, that I feel would serve citizens the best and be the easiest to understand. The first is just a simple change in the number of votes you need to pass a TIF. Currently, it's 5-4, simple majority. You could easily change that to be 6-3. You know, is that perfect? No. Could you still get a city council that is willing to disregard what their constituents wants and change it? Yes, but with a 6-3 vote, that's a bit harder to do. The second way, and the way that I would prefer to see the TIF process change, is to essentially take the final approval out of city council hands altogether. So essentially how it works currently is the city council approves the TIF, and if there's no challenges to that, it just happens. You could very easily change that process to look like, hey, if city council approves the TIF and that TIF is over a certain threshold, it then has to go to Norman voters for the final approval. Now, what that number ends up looking like, that's, you know, where some discussions would have to come in. If I was elected, I would essentially hold a Ward 6 town hall and say, like, okay, what do we want to do with TIF reform? You know, what kind of numbers do you all want to have a say in voting on, as opposed to, you know, what's too minute, you know, to go to the ballot box. You know, just kind of kicking around with some numbers in my head, looking at past TIFs, I would say if it's above 100 million, it should go to the voters, or above a certain threshold percentage of the city's sales tax revenue for that fiscal year. So my thoughts on everything, I've kind of been like sprinkling them in here and there, but I do believe that TIFs are important financial mechanisms to redevelop areas of Norman that actually need it. However, the TIF process that we have currently, it's not as transparent as I would like it to be, and there is opportunities for special interest groups to have kind of undue influence on the process, when you only need to convince 5 city council members to ultimately pass it, as opposed to the thousands of Norman Knights who might have to vote on it if it reached a certain threshold, if the TIF reform did go through. You know, charter amendments, it's the best long-term solution, and it would really make it about we, the people of Norman, to have the final say. You know, if we want these expensive projects to go through for the foreseeable future, and not the city council. And this isn't meant to be a slight on, you know, the city councilors at the time, but at the end of the day, they're just 9 people who, you know, are varying backgrounds, and they have their own opinions, but their opinions may not represent what Norman wants at the time. And so the citizens are that final check and balance to ensure that everything is appropriate and it is the direction that we want to take our community in, if we do get a very expensive TIF like the Rock Creek Entertainment District TIF again in the future. So if you have any questions about this presentation, feel free to reach out to me directly at KyleForNorman.com. And then, as I stated in the beginning, you could also look at other issues I have either on my website, which is KyleForNorman.com, or on my YouTube page, or any other socials listed below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.